Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. This is great tournaments of the past. So today's lecture is sponsored by Patrick Davenport. He has a message. Happy belated birthday to the greatest chess teacher and even better friend, Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I'm not sure who the greatest chess teacher is, but thanks for the birthday wishes and the friend wishes. So, as Patrick knows, this was my favorite tournament book as a kid because it had a lot of stuff that mattered to me at the time, which doesn't matter much now, but I still have fond memories of the book. San Antonio 72. First of all, it was the first tournament in the U.S. that had these strong Russian players playing, Soviet players, Petrosian and Karpov. And it had a lot of the players around the world who were top level, which was not a common thing in the U.S. Since New York 1924, actually. Portisch played, Petrosian, Karpov, Gligerich, Keres, Hort, Mecking, Larsen, and so forth. And I think it was the first time Karpov played in the United States, 1972. And this tournament was held a few months after the World Championship in Iceland between Fischer and Spassky, who were also invited but declined. And which I found out later, but I don't think I found out from the tournament book, but maybe I did. But I found out later in my life that Fischer actually showed up to the tournament for the last round and was analyzing some of the games at the tournament as the world champion. I think he just came on his own. So you can see on the screen here, this is the standings of the tournament. And then they have a cross table. This is the only cross table you'll see. It's highlighted in blue there. It's pretty small. And then chessgames.com has all 120 games. It was a 16-player round robin. So there's 8 games per round because there's 16 players. There's 15 rounds because there's 16 players. And 8 times 15 is 120. So there were 120 games, which I had to choose just a few of to show you guys in the lecture here. If you guys want to sponsor a lecture like Patrick did, then you can email Karen. Her information's on the screen, and we can have a lecture on whatever topic you find interesting. So I remember as a kid, I really liked the tournament book because I didn't know what a grandmaster looked like. Now, if I go to a tournament like the World Open or U.S. Masters or National Open or any of the national high school tournaments, there's 50 grandmasters there. And of course, in St. Louis, I saw a grandmaster everywhere I turned. If I went out to eat, I saw grandmasters eating at the restaurant, no matter where it was. Even when it wasn't anywhere near the chess club. I remember once going to a restaurant and there were like 6 grandmasters there, and we weren't near the chess club. So it was strange. But anyway, they had pictures of the grandmasters and their ratings and some short biographical information about the players, which as a kid I found fascinating. And many of the best players in the world were there. And the tournament was held in the U.S., which is exceedingly rare in 1972 or before that. There's another page on Wikipedia that talks about the chess tournament. Sponsor was Church's Fried Chicken. And Church's Chicken, the Bill Church guy, he was a chess player. And in 1962, they had the U.S. Open in San Antonio, which my dad played in. And Bill Church was playing in the tournament. And there were coupons at the tournament for Church's Fried Chicken. Because I don't know if he was sponsoring the U.S. Open, but he had his chicken restaurants, which weren't, there weren't a lot of them in 1962, but by 1972 there were a ton of them, and he sponsored the tournament in San Antonio, first international chicken chess tournament. And according to what I read on the internets, when Fischer showed up for the last round, he wasn't happy with some of the quick draws in the last round, and he called the players chicken. So, which is sort of funny. Very high-rated tournament. Portisch, Petrosian, and Karpov tied for first, as was not unexpected. And there were some local players too, like Ken Smith. Julio Kaplan was from Puerto Rico. And then there was Mario Campos Lopez, who was from Mexico, not far away, I guess, from Texas. And Duncan Suttles, famous grandmaster, was actually an IM during the tournament, and he got his last grandmaster norm at the tournament. And here's another cross table of the tournament, which you can see. And then there's another cross table here, and there's a page from the Texas Chess Association which talks about the tournament and shows like an advertisement. First prize was $4,000. I read that Petrosian complained about the prize fund because first prize was a lot more than like 10th place, and he thought the prizes should be more evenly split amongst the players. And then this is the book, San Antonio 72. That's the book that I had as a kid. You can still buy it. Talk about the prize money they won. There's a picture of Gligorich. List of participants. Karpov and Larsen playing with somebody at the wall board making the moves that they're playing. And some puzzles from the tournament, which happened in the rounds of the event. We're not going to look at those puzzles because they weren't very, very good. So, yeah, you can easily find a cross table on the internet. You can see all the players and their ratings, the round-by-round results, and you can find all the games at chessgames.com. Or, of course, if you have ChessBase and databases, you can find the games there. Okay, so really exciting for me because it was a really exciting tournament. For me as a kid, I would read the book a lot and see like what the players looked like and what openings they played. And there were some sparse annotations by David Levy and Bent Larsen in the tournament book. Talked about the games. So it was real exciting for me to see all these top players playing in the U.S., and I was probably like 7 or 8 years old when I got the tournament book. Came out in 73, although I probably got the book in 77 or 78, I'm guessing. And I remember reading it often and looking at the games and the diagrams and stuff like that. Okay, first game we're going to look at is just a crush with Bent Larsen as white, one of the world's top players in 72, playing Ken Smith. Ken Smith got invited because he was a local player, and he's not only well-known chess player, adding his name to the Smith-Morra Gambit, published some books on the Smith-Morra, and he was a frequent trier of the opening, although not with successful results in this tournament. And he came in last place because he was by far the weakest player in the event. He's also a famous poker player, possibly better at poker than chess. And a good friend of mine and co-author of chess book, The Finegold Defense, Bob Schiffoni, was good friends with Ken Smith. And Bob lived in Texas for a long time and was friends with Ken and told me some stories about him and such. Okay, so this is Larsen versus Ken Smith. We're not going to see a Smith-Morra because Smith has black. Instead, we see this kind of neo-Grunfeld type position that I play with black. Larsen played just solid, didn't go for a big advantage. Then b4. e6 is a very passive move. Typically, black would play something like bishop g4 here, or bishop f5, or even play b6, bishop b7. And sometimes when they play a passive move like bishop e2, I'll even play something like c5, losing a tempo, since bishop e2 is passive, transposed to a Grunfeld, a tempo down. So e6 is a very passive move. b4, white gains space on the queen side. b6, and very slow development. But the game didn't last very long, because eventually things got interesting in the center. Larsen got a big space advantage on the queen side. And nothing's been traded yet. And after knight e5, the trades and the captures began. And eventually, Larsen was able to establish his dominance as one of the top 10 or 15 players in the world against somebody who was one of the top 10 players in Texas. So they traded knights on e5. Black can't play knight e4 here because the d pawn is pinned to the queen. So he plays knight to d7. f4, defending the pawn. Ken Smith makes quite a weakening move here and plays f6. Never play f6. Takes. And e4, crashing through on the d file, where white's rook is opposite black's queen, attacking the d5 pawn several times. D takes e4. And Larsen played rook d6. He's eyeing the pawn on e6, but more importantly, he wants to double rooks on the d file and put pressure on the knight on d7. F takes e5, rook d1, rook e7, bishop to g4. Larsen's threatening bishop takes e6 check, which wins all of black's pieces. King h8, rook takes e6, and you can see that white is all over black's passive position here on the d file, with things getting pinned and attacked. Rook takes, queen takes, bishop c8, not the best move, but position was probably already lost. Knight takes e4, queen c7, and knight d6. And in this position, white's threatening your typical checkmate, which is not a smothered mate per se, because you can't take the queen on g8. So white's threatening just knight check, queen g8 checkmate. Although if the rook could take the queen, we would have a smothered mate with knight f7 check. And white's also threatening knight takes the bishop, and then the knight on d7 is incredibly hanging. It's attacked 3 times and defended once. So since knight takes bishop is a winning threat, and knight f7 check is a winning threat, this is where Ken Smith resigned. There's nothing you can do here. You're just losing the game. And even if he played a move like knight f6, for example, then I could take the bishop. You can't take, because my queen and bishop make a battery, and if you take the bishop on g4, queen e8 check leads to checkmate. And probably, without doing any analysis, I assume that knight f7 check probably also wins. But knight takes bishop certainly wins. So in this position, Ken Smith resigned. Basically, he got run over by Larsen, who was, just 2 or 3 classes better than him. And he just played because he was the local player, local celebrity, get the local guy in there. And Ken Smith actually did win a game in the tournament, but he only won the 1 game. Okay. So that was a crush by Larsen. Now, next game is between 2 heavyweights, Paul Keres and Henrique Mecking. Mecking was the best player ever from Brazil, winning two interzonal tournaments in the 70s. And Paul Keres is one of the top 20 players in the world for 45 years in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And this is near the end of Paul Keres' career, so he's not like top 10 in the world anymore, but he's close. He's still about 2,600 FIDE, and he's still fighting with the best players in the world. And what a lot of people don't know about Keres, possibly I did a Great Players of the Past on him, he was also a great correspondence player, and he was a great problem solver. If there were puzzles in a magazine or a book, he would solve all of them pretty easily. Okay, so Keres is white against Mecking. Both are big attacking players. I could have played a Benoni, but Keres just played transpose into a Queen's Gambit position. And after A3 takes, this is just a Queen's Gambit accepted by transposition. This is the exact same position as you would see in a Queen's Gambit. Okay, so bishop E7, castles, bishop F4. Not the most common move, but develops the bishop. Good move. B6, Mecking wants to fianchetto his bishop. Queen to D3. This is a typical idea in this opening. White wants to eventually play bishop A2 to B1 and get some kind of checkmate threats. And white also wants to put his rooks in the center. Bishop B7, rook D1. Very standard kind of Queen's Gambit. Now, black played rook C8. White played bishop A2. White's getting ready to play for D5 or bishop B1 and get some kind of attack going against the black king. And black played the very strange knight B8. And the idea of knight B8 is it opens up the bishop on the diagonal. The knight could come back to D7 later. So the bishop's not blocked. And currently, black is threatening bishop A6, which skewers the queen and rook. So knight B8 is a weird move, but it has some ideas. Rook FE1, stopping the immediate threat of winning the exchange. Knight D5. Another reason black played knight B8. Now he has sufficient defense of his knight on D5, so he can take back with a piece. Bishop B1, threatening checkmate. So if knight takes bishop, queen takes H7 checkmate. Black played G6, bishop H6, knight takes C3, attacking the rook on D1. Pawn takes. Maybe Mecking thought he could win this pawn later. Rook E8, saving his rook. C4, advancing the center pawns and defending his A3 pawn with his queen. Queen D6, attacking the A pawn again. Rook E3, rook left. The rook's going to start attacking the black king and also defends the pawn on A3. Bishop F6, good square for the bishop. And D5, very aggressive move, which eventually gives white a pass D pawn, and it blocks this bishop out of the game. Takes. Knight D7. The knight has the C5 square and the E5 square. Bishop A2, defending the passed pawn. Knight C5, attacking the queen. Queen to D2. Rook takes rook. Queen takes. Knight A4. Black wants to play either rook C3 or knight C3, attacking all of white's pieces. Rook E1. White's considering playing queen E8 check at some point, and that point would be now. But it's not white's turn, so white can't play queen E8 check because it's not his turn to move. But that would be a winning move if he could play it. Queen D8, stopping that, and then D6. And the idea is we're opening up the diagonal for the bishop. We're advancing our passed pawn, and you can't take the pawn because queen E8 check would eventually lead to checkmate. Or if black doesn't want to get checkmated, he can give his queen away with queen F8 and then bishop takes queen. And this is also winning for white since white's up a rook. So the d pawn is poisoned. Played knight c3, which is why he played knight a4. Bishop takes f7 check. Pretty easy calculation. King takes, queen e6 checkmate. Not hard to calculate. So black played king h8. And then d7. And the idea is we're threatening the rook. We're threatening queen e8 check. And if you take the pawn, then bishop e6 will skewer your queen and rook. So after d7, Mecking resigned. Keres won the game. Very forceful, brutal win for Keres. There were a lot of such games in this tournament, and I wanted to give you a taste of some of the more aggressive wins, some of the quicker wins, and not show you some of the draws that happened that may or may not have been that interesting. Okay, next game we'll flip the board. This is the game Walter Browne versus Vlastimil Hort. Vlastimil Hort was, I think, at this point, number 10 in the world. His rating was 2,600 FIDE, which at that time was quite high. Walter was about 2535 FIDE, something like that. Hort has black, and he played Alekhine defense, which isn't very common, but it is a favorite of our sponsor. So if somebody's going to play the Alekhine and win, our sponsor needs to see that because he's the sponsor. So okay, and they played like one of the main lines. Sometimes they play g6. Sometimes they take on e5. Bishop g4 is a move. Probably in 1972, bishop g4 was the main move. Okay, and this is all pretty standard. d5 is a move I don't know, but maybe it's a common move. Probably our sponsors had black in similar position if he plays bishop g4. When I play blitz chess and I play Alekhines, I typically play bishop g4 and not g6 or d takes e5. So I would have black in a position like this in a blitz game. Trade everything. Everybody's trading. Black has a weak pawn on d6, but black's pieces are all good. Eventually, Browne gangs up on the pawn, defends his b pawn, and wins a pawn. Black gets tremendous counterplay. Now black is skewering the rook and the queen. So if the queen moves to a random square, rook takes rook would just win a piece. So queen f4, defending the rook. Bishop e5, saying move your queen off of the rook. And basically, white's going to have no choice because the only queen move that stays on the rook on d2 is queen g5, and then I can play h6, and white's in trouble. So Browne had this prepared when he took the pawn. He sacrificed his queen, played rook takes d8, bishop takes, rook takes f8, and bishop takes. And white has a rook, a minor piece, and a pawn for a queen. And white has the two bishops. And probably Browne thought he was better here with his nice bishops. Bishop pair looks pretty good, actually. Okay, Hort played knight d4, trying to take the bishop on f3 and ruin the pawn structure. Bishop d6 check. King walks into the center. White can't give another check because then black would respond with a checkmate. So bishop d5. Queen d2, threatening the b2 pawn. b3. King d7, threatening the bishop. White's bishops look really nice in the center. Knight e2 check. Now, if you go on the internet, which is always a risky thing to do, it says that white should play king h1 here, and one guy argued white was winning, and one guy said, no, black is still winning, but king h1 is better than king f1. Although, I must say, if I had white in this position, I wouldn't want to play king h1. That looks sort of silly. But king h1 is a better move than king f1. Now, Hort plays the very nice queen to d3, threatening double, triple, quadruple checks. So king e1. Now Browne can castle again. Or wait, maybe not. Knight g1. Very nice move you don't see very often. Threatening queen e2 mate. Queen e2 mate is not easy to stop. And it's clear in this position that black is winning. White's rook is still on a1. White's king is in trouble. And the queen and knight have made a really nice home together to attack the white king. White has to play bishop f3. And this ending is just winning for black. Bishop is almost trapped. Gets his bishop out at the cost of his pawn. And I like this game not only because of knight g1, which was quite nice, but here black did a king walk up the board. Queen h5 check, queen h1 check, always repeat. Then king f5, king g4, bishop c5, threatens rook d4, pinning the queen to the king. King f3, threatening queen b1 mate. Well, mate soon. King g1, and now queen g6 check. Very nice backwards move. If you play king f1, queen here is going to be mate. And if your king goes to h2 or h1, then queen g2 is mate. So in this position, Browne resigned and Hort won. So I thought that was pretty nice to win with black and an Alekhine's defense in this tournament with such very strong players. Not the most common opening, but good surprise weapon. And Hort, at this point in his career, was simply better than Browne. And this game, I think I've shown on stream before, between Portisch and Karpov. And Portisch and Karpov were two of the three players who tied for first, along with Petrosian. And Portisch beat Karpov relatively quickly. So, because Karpov made a mistake in the opening, they transposed into some kind of queen's pawn opening from a Nimzo Indian. It looked more like a queen's gambit. And then d5 is a very strong move. And in this position, I think b6 has a bad reputation because of d5. And it's one of a couple of times that Portisch has played d5 early against Karpov and won the game as a consequence. Karpov took the knight on c3. He's hoping Portisch takes back, and then Karpov wins the pawn on d5. But d takes e6 is good. Bishop b4. E takes d7. This position, white was threatening e7, forking the queen and rook, as well as the bishop, as well as the knight. And bishop b4 stops white from taking the bishop on c3, and it stops white from playing e7 because the bishop on b4 is defending e7. Takes, a3. And this position is just terrible for black. Black's queen doesn't really have a good square. White's bishop on c4 is very menacing. And black isn't ready to get his rook out yet and defend. Queen c7. h3, stopping bishop g4. Again, black's queen is not in a good square. Not a good place for the queen. Queen b8, trying to hide. Bishop b5 attacking the rook, which is trapping the other rook. Rook e7 looks a little suspicious. Bishop c6. Now the bishop on d6 is attacked. And luckily, Portisch is a big fan of my stream. No, that's not true. And in fact, not only is Portisch not a fan of my stream, Portisch has a brother named Ferenc Portisch, who's an IM. And when I lived in Europe, I played Portisch's brother, Ferenc, and he crushed me. So I can't not only beat Portisch, I can't beat his brother. But always sack the exchange. And Karpov went down very quickly after this exchange sacrifice. I guess he was really surprised that White would do such a move. Takes knight to d4. White wants to play knight f5, queen g4 check, attacking everything. So he takes the knight. Rook takes. Now White has this big attack with the queen, rook, bishop, and Black has permanent problems with the king on the open G line and with the weak f6 pawn. Black just is in a lot of trouble here. And here Karpov could defend and probably try to hold the game, but his defense was quite poor. Played queen e5, queen f3, king h8, rook d5. The queen can't leave the f pawn. And in this position, Black actually resigned, because whether you play queen e6 or queen takes b2, which are the only moves that I see, White can play bishop d4, and there's just no defense to bishop f6 check. And if you play king g7, I have rook g5 check, which wins the game immediately. And queen takes b2 is the same. Bishop d4, attacking the queen and threatening queen takes with mate. All kinds of checkmate. And Black can do a check or maybe two checks, but that's it. I could check here, I could check here, and then there's just no defense to this brutal attack that's coming against Black's king. So a crushing victory for Portisch, and after rook d5, Karpov had to resign. Queen e5 was a real blunder. And king h8 just lost immediately to rook d5. Probably he was worried about the g file and the h file and wasn't thinking about bishop d4 and winning on the diagonal. So remember, boys and girls, always sack the exchange, which is something that obviously White did this game. Now I wanted to show a game from all of the participants who tied for first. Well, here is a game between Portisch and Karpov, who tied for first. Our last game is from Petrosian, but I didn't want to show the whole game. I just wanted to show the end. This is Petrosian versus Larsen, and this was a very exciting game. Black in this position is a pawn ahead, but Black's pawn structure is pretty iffy, and White's pieces are very active. White has a better pawn structure. White has the monster knight on e5. Black's c pawn is attacked. But first things first, the rook on e3 is under pressure. So Petrosian played rook b3, attacking the bishop on b7, which doesn't really have a good square to go to. And in this position, I think Larsen made the losing move, but I don't blame him, because the winning idea from Petrosian is simply amazing. Petrosian was the only player in the tournament to go undefeated. He had 6 wins and 9 draws. The other 2 players who tied for first, Portisch and Karpov, both had 7 wins, 7 draws, and a loss. And Larsen played rook to d8, and he said, Petrosian, I dare you to take my bishop. And Petrosian said, I'll take a bishop. Sounds like a good move to me. And Larsen played knight to e3, threatening the queen two different ways with the knight and the rook. And if the queen moves away, which seems like a good idea, then black can play rook d1 check, which will win a lot of material. So that was what Larsen's trick was. And Petrosian said, silly grandmaster, tricks are for kids. Played queen e2. Larsen played his trick, rook to d1 check. Petrosian sacrificed his queen, one of the famous Petrosian queen sacrifices. Knight takes, rook takes a6, and next move, white's going to double rooks on the 7th rank with a crushing position. And white's rook's on the 7th, the knight on e5, the bishop on the diagonal, black's weak pawn structure, knight that's out of play, actually means that white's winning. And in fact, when white plays rook on 6 to a7, I don't have a good suggestion for black on how to defend g7. So he played knight e3. Petrosian ignored that and doubled rooks on the 7th rank, threatening checkmate. Rook takes pawn check, rook h7 check, and rook g7 mate. Knight f5. He got his knight back to defend the g7 pawn. And Petrosian said, well, I'll attack your knight then. And if your knight moves away, I'll checkmate you. If your knight doesn't move away, I'll take it. So Petrosian got Larsen, I should say, got out-tacticked by Petrosian. Queen d8. Larsen has one trick up his sleeve. If you take the knight, queen d1 check, and queen f1 mate. So Petrosian gives himself luft, h3, queen d1 check, king h2. And now we're ready to take the knight and give our checkmate with our rooks. Queen d4, threatening the f4 pawn. Knight g6, defending f4, putting pressure on the rook, and still attacking the knight. And now it's over. Black doesn't have any more counter chances. Black played knight e3. They traded into a winning endgame for white. Rook g7, rook g7, knight f8, and bishop f3. White's a pawn up, and black has 3 isolated pawns, and white has the better minor piece and the better pawn structure. And I like the way Petrosian sacks his queen, gets a big attack, and then wins an endgame by 1 tempo. h5, you want to trade pawns off when you're losing in the endgame, and you especially want white to take this, because those are the wrong colored rook pawns. That'll give Larsen excellent drawing chances. So he played g5, keeping his passed g pawn. Still trading pawns. Now you can't take the bishop because I promote my pawn. So knight e6. And now Petrosian calculated accurately that the king and pawn ending is winning. He takes king e4, and he wins by 1 tempo. And in this position, black resigned. If black goes here, and then here, and then here, it's white's move. If it's black's move, it's a draw. Then h2 would draw. But it's white's move. When the pawn's on the 6th rank, we win easily. Any check will do. And you just check where the queen goes to g4. And then after king here, we just move our king, and black has to give the pawn away. There's no stalemate with the pawn on the 6th rank. If the pawn's on the 7th rank, it's a draw because we'll get stalemate tricks. But since the pawn's on the 6th rank, everything just wins for white. White either puts the queen here or puts the queen here with check, and black's going to end up losing the game. So after a b6, Larsen called it a day. A brilliant win from Petrosian. Very strong tournament. with a lot of foreign grandmasters, and especially in those days, we didn't see Soviet players playing in the United States. That was very rare. And the only tournaments that were as strong in the last 10 years or so from this tournament were the Piatigorsky Cups, but those tournaments only had like 7 or 8 players. This tournament had 16 players, so we had a lot of American grandmasters like Walter Browne, Larry Evans, Donald Byrne, who wasn't a grandmaster, but close. Should have been a grandmaster. And then we had guys trying to become a grandmaster like Ken Smith, Julio Kaplan, Duncan Suttles, who got his final GM norm. Then we had the world-class players, Hort, Keres, Karpov, Petrosian, Larsen, Portisch, Hort. So very, very strong tournament. Very exciting for me as a kid to read the tournament book. If you're able to purchase the tournament book, I recommend it. You'll see pictures of the players, a little biography about them. You'll see all these great games with some light annotations by Bent Larsen and David Levy. And it was a time when in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you would see tournament books. And nowadays, the games are shown live on the internet, so we don't really have any books to open up and look at our great tournaments anymore. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I want to thank our sponsor again, Patrick Davenport. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, please contact Karen. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. And I'll see you guys next time with more great tournaments of the past. Thanks to our sponsor again. Bye, everybody.